The AFC has it all over the NFC when it comes to quarterback depth. We know it's bad, but going through it this morning, I'm going to share that with you. It's not close. And the reason I bring it up is because it sounds like Aaron Rodgers is on the move to the Jets. At least that's what we think. This drama plays out every single day. He obviously enjoys it all. But Trey Wingo had a tweet saying, like, look, this thing to the Jets is done. So let's look and see what that means. We'll run through the AFC. We'll run through all the teams. I have a couple of sides about a couple different quarterbacks here. Buffalo's got Josh Allen, Miami to New England Mac, kind of arrow down at this point. Rodgers to the Jets, let's say that. Burrow, Cincinnati, Baltimore, Lamar question, Huntley on the roster. Pittsburgh, Kenny Pickett, Cleveland, Deshaun Watson, Jacksonville, Trevor Lawrence, Ryan Tannehill in Tennessee, Matt Ryan decision for the Colts this week. They said it'd be this week. We'll see what happens. And then Davis Mills in Houston. You imagine that would probably change with the draft here. Kansas City and the Chargers, Mahomes, Herbert. Those guys are pretty good. Vegas going all Pats backups with Jimmy G signing and now Stidham. And then R. Wilson with the Denver Broncos. All right. The NFC has Hurts, who I'm going to look at the Sando top quarterbacks, the tier stuff that he did from last summer, which is just a lot of fun. We love having him on. Ends up being a ton of debate, some good, some not so great. But between Hurts, who would likely flirt with being in the top 10, he might be the only NFC quarterback that you project to be a top 10 guy. Like when that thing comes out in the summer, and again, there's still some TBDs here with some of these teams, but that's kind of crazy to think. Like, wait, is Hurts going to be the only guy in the top 10 for Sando's thing? Or just us sitting around talking about it? I guess Dak could potentially flirt with it before you push back on that. Like, you know, it actually is getting a little light. Like I felt for a couple of years, maybe the numbers skewed it all where it's like, man, the quarterback depth in this league is actually really good. We might be hitting a stretch right now, especially when you look at the depth charts. You're like, wow, is half the league kind of screwed? So to keep it going, you got Daniel Jones, 1 year with the Giants, huge improvement. He got his contract. We'll see. I'm not convinced on any of it yet, but at least it feels a lot more stable with the staff and the offense that they're running. So that's a win for the Giants right now. I just don't know what it means. I got to see it for like 2 years. Sam Howell on the roster for Washington. All right, Minnesota's got Cousins, Detroit, Goff. It'd be Jordan Love for Green Bay. If Rodgers moves on, then Fields, Chicago. We're going to get to that Chicago trade moving out of the number one pick here in a few minutes as well. Tampa Bay, Trask. Kyle Trask is the only quarterback under contract. Carolina has P.J. Walker, who's a restricted free agent, Matt Corral. New Orleans signed Carr. Atlanta's got Ritter, who had only 4 starts at the end of the year. They added Heineke. So, you know, when you look at that division, Trask, PJ, maybe, or Carolina takes a guy number one, which would obviously make a lot of sense for them moving up. And then Atlanta, you know, I don't know what to make of Ritter. I wouldn't feel good saying anything definitive either way. And Carr's good enough, especially for this division, which may be the reason they went ahead and signed him. San Francisco's kind of a mess, at least trying to figure it out. Purdy, his timeline for the surgery, it got pushed back. So if you look at the reports from when he just recently got the surgery, that would put him at throwing in mid-June. If that's to be believed, I have no idea if that'll happen or not. Trey Lance at the end of January said he was cleared and then sort of retracted that and said he was fully cleared 8 or 9 days later, where he said, look, what I meant was running. It wasn't like it was this egregious thing. He just kind of misspoke and made a mistake, had to address it. But that's a TBD with his ankle injury. And then they brought in Sam Darnold. Seattle, just to touch on the Geno Smith fake contract for 3 years and $105 million. When I saw the headline, I went, okay, that's probably fake. Like almost every huge contract, you look at the first 3 years, you look at the cash, you look at the signing bonus and all that stuff. This Geno thing is even close to $105 million. It's not. It's like 3 years, $75 million. Yes, there's some incentive stuff. If it really works out and he plays to the level he just played at, maybe even a little bit better, maybe. I don't know if that's likely, but the other thing that's kind of likely is this might be a 1 year deal, whether it's 27 plus million in cash. That when you go in and look at what this contract is, and this is not new, but it's just so weird that it's now 2023. We see the headline and then everybody's like, man, oh, wow, look at that. You never would have guessed that. Like, Geno, this is amazing. And again, I would have never even guessed that we'd be talking about Geno this way, even with a contract that was misleading. And by the way, I also don't blame the agents, because no agent would be like, hey, I'm going to leak the deal. It's done, to the reporter. It could be 105, but it's definitely not going to be that. So yeah, it's lower. Go with the it's way lower headline. But It's almost like every one of these contracts, we shouldn't be allowed to talk about it on any shows for like a week. Because when I dug into it this morning, the $40 million that's guaranteed, well, 12.7 of that is because of injury, which, isn't a likely thing to happen where he's just hurt and can't play again. So they could actually move on from this. And that's why when Pete Carroll said this contract does not get in the way of us necessarily drafting another quarterback, people are like, wait, what? And you're like, oh, well, it feels like kind of like a 1 year make good, because his number at like 25, 27 million for just 1 year for a quarterback that's on a veteran like extension, that's actually pretty low. That number is low when you look at the new reality of what some of these cap hits are for these quarterbacks, as the numbers keep escalating more and more, as they should. Rams, Matthew Stafford, who knows what's going to happen there. And then you've got Kyler Murray in Arizona, who, is coming off an injury and a lot of questions. I mean, it's very rare that you would have this many dudes hint at a player being just a guy that doesn't seem to get it from the team standpoint. But that's a massive contract, which you've already touched on. So you add it all up, what do you have? If you look at Sandoz QB tiers from July and you put Rodgers in the AFC to the Jets, that's Rodgers, Mahomes, Allen, Herbert, Burrow, Wilson, Watson, and Lamar. That's 8 of the top 10 in the AFC, with the TBD on what's going to happen here with Lamar. The only top 10s that were from the NFC, Brady retired, Stafford, who has no chance at it. So Hurts, I would expect to move up. Because, again, that middle area that felt like it was deep and people at least put up serviceable numbers in today's version of the NFL where, there's some passing numbers where you'll look at a guy and go, wow, what a great statistical season. You're like, yeah, I still would want like 12 guys over that guy. This middle gets really weird. When I was looking at the rankings again from July, like Hurts was 20th, which was totally fair. He was a question mark. I think he was a question mark even to the Philadelphia Eagles. I think all those questions have been answered. I'd like to see 2 awesome years like this where I go, hey, that's a guy I'd pencil in every single year. But I'd imagine he's probably close to like top 10. I mean, hell, Baker was 19th last year in these rankings, and Hurts was 20th. Dak probably has a chance. I think Trevor Lawrence, who was 23rd last season, has a chance. If he were to jump up in the 10, again, he shouldn't be ahead of Hurts. I don't know that he should be ahead of Dak. Maybe some people look at it that way. Because, again, it's not just Sando doing this. It's 50-plus people who work in the NFL, front office coaches, coordinate, like the whole deal. Like it's a great resource of information, which also speaks to how different we can be in the way we see things. So these are real dudes talking about it. That could be, I don't know, 9, 8 of the 10. It's bad. It's really bad for the NFC. And I do think we're at the very beginning, or at least this past season going into this next year, the beginning of, wait a minute, what happened to all the quarterback depth? So that brings us to the Bears and their decision to keep Fields, which, I think anything's on the table when you're running an organization. And at this point, Fields is in that group for me. If there was a tier, not with a number, but I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. The running was cool, man. The running was really cool. The sack totals are insane. Some of that is not on him. Some of it is on him. The interception stuff, it's just not just the numbers or the percentage of interceptions, the decision-making where it's like, what did you see there? I think it's problematic at the same time, but he didn't have any playmakers, which speaks to maybe going, hey, look, we could take another pick, but we don't like the receiver market, which we already mentioned. There's not another guy that's available for trade, or at least we don't have that move to make now. Maybe it's a little bit later. Maybe something else happens in front of the draft. And the Bears wanted to put this all to bed for Justin Fields, which I think some people can look at and say, well, there's tremendous value in ending all of the debate, all the soap opera BS stuff. Yeah, I think there's some. I think some of it can be a little overstated. I think it sounds cool in a column. I think it sounds good in kind of wrapping it up and spinning the positive to all this. But I feel like the prices always go up. If you're one of the other teams that desperately wants Stroud or wants Bryce Young or wants Will Levis or some of this Anthony Richardson stuff that's taken off, which I can't, like Carolina talking about potentially going number 1 with him. I feel like the closer you get to the draft, there's more pressure on the team that doesn't have a quarterback and looks around being like, we got to do something. We got to figure this out. So I wonder if that price could have gone up, because the price the Bears received for that number 1 pick from Carolina was the 9th pick. So they moved down 8 this year. They get the 61st pick this year. They get a first rounder in 24. They get a second rounder in 25. So really, if you look at history, some of these trades have involved like 3 firsts going over. Some of the prices seem lighter than this. This feels like in the last decade plus kind of like a middle price. So it's not overwhelming, which always leads me to like, why would you do it now? And if your point or the Bears' point or the counter is it's great to do it for Fields, you know, it'd be great to do it for Fields, have the most assets you could possibly have for him. Like patting somebody in the back and looking at him going, you're our guy, buddy, is actually not as valuable as having more draft capital. All right. And you can factor in all these different things. If you go, hey, they should have gotten more from this. All right, but there isn't maybe that sure thing, can't miss prospect, which still misses at times at number one. So that changes the price. The trade value chart, which I thought was like comically flawed, and I don't even know how much people, but they still gets referenced every now and then because, again, the price, if it was a can't miss guy, again, Trevor Lawrence was kind of creeping into that. Andrew Luck was certainly that when he was coming out number one. First of all, the team probably wouldn't even trade that pick. That would have been a different conversation for Fields if it was that kind of quarterback prospect, right? But with this class, I think you can sign off on Fields, and you've already invested the pick into him on top of everything else. There's a bunch of different things that I'm kind of throwing at you here. It just felt like with DJ Moore, who's 5 years, he's caught 364 balls, 5,200 plus yards, 21 touchdowns. The weird number is that he had 364 catches on 616 targets. That's not a great ratio. But before I go too far with that, you have end of the road Cam Newton, Heineke, Kyle Allen, Will Grier, Teddy Bridgewater, PJ Walker, Sam Darnold, washed Cam, Baker, and more Sam Darnold throwing the football. Well, that's an argument for the DJ Moore crowd that's out there. So if you look at the history, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this, when the Rams moved up for Goff, they traded Tennessee, the number 15 pick, 2 second-rounders. They got a third back. They got another first that ended up being 5th overall, which might have been why the Bears wanted to pair with Carolina. And I'm trying to just think of all the different factors here where they're like, hey, Carolina's definitely going to be bad next year. So let's just go ahead and lock in that top 10 pick that we know instead of trading with somebody else that maybe turns like when you do the Mahomes trade, that Buffalo did. Buffalo traded out of 10. They got Kansas City's number 27 that year, a third, and then a 2018 first. You're like, yeah, Kansas City kind of has their shit together, right? Not that anybody thought that necessarily this was going to happen with Mahomes, but you get my point. Your trading partner may be more important than the actual position or overall haul. The Wentz trade was a lot of stuff. The RG3 one, man, that was a ton. Number 6, a second rounder, a first and 13 and 14 for the Rams number 2 pick. So they didn't even control the draft. What you're doing here to Carolina is you're letting them now control the draft. They control it all. It can seem like it's not that big of a deal from number 1 to number 2 or just move up one spot, which the Bears did in the past, moving over for Mitch, where that price wasn't nearly as much. I guess to just look at it all again, step back from all the things I'm throwing at you, is the first time I heard about the trade, I went, all right, I guess that's okay. Which makes me go, why would you do it now? Which I still think I'm right about. I think people are overstating the ending, the soap opera part of it, because assets are more important than that stuff that doesn't really matter. Because if your guy's not wired to handle that stuff, then it's probably not going to work out. I don't want a quarterback who's really sensitive. I don't, because it's a brutal position. And we still don't know what Fields is. Like I said before, you put him in that category of guys like, I don't know, TBD on that one. But we do know this, even with this draft class and Carolina having the number 1 pick, the gap between quarterbacks in these two conferences is probably as staggering as I've ever seen it.